Hey, family, this is Pastor Barrett Berry of the Empowered Living Church, the ELC, and we're hosting a series of conversations with leaders, talks, and we're excited about having our panel today. A group of leaders from varied parts of this nation, from Charlotte, from Atlanta, from Indianapolis, all individual hotspots, and it's exciting in a sense, but it brings us into a sense of being surreal because of the challenges America is facing today. And so we're just having, I'm talking kind of formal, but it's a laid back conversation sitting along the fire and talking among leaders about what's going on in America. And the question is, it's a crisis in America. Should we let it burn? And I put that out there because of the varied challenges that we're facing now as a community. Just to get us started, we'll go around and introduce people, and we're waiting for one more guest, but until said time, we have Justin Bolden, Pastor Justin Bolden from Reconciled Church here in Charlotte, North Carolina. He is, I call him an activist pastor because he's connected to the community, and he takes the issues of social justice and economic development serious in his own right, and also cross-cultural connections. And so there's Justin Bolden. And then we have, I like to call him the counselor himself of Atlanta, Mr. Derek Bozeman. And he is a talk show host at, he'll tell you this, I don't see it in front of me, WAOK, I believe it is, there in Atlanta. And he also is a former city councilor there in Atlanta and well respected, and he is an activist. What he speaks, he believes, and what he speaks, he does. He is out there. Most recently, there were some kids who were selling water, trying to make some money on the corners in Atlanta, and they were, I think, unjustly arrested. Well, this man here went out with some other men and a few ladies, and they stood on that corner to protect our children. So we tip our hat to that type of leadership. And then we have Kiana Osborne. She is a community organizer here in the great city of Charlotte, North Carolina. She had a vision of getting together about 1,000 people on Sunday after church to bring the churches together to take a stand. And we've been promoting this the last few days. But today, about 3,000 to 5,000 people joined in a park here in Charlotte to say we're not going to take this anymore. And today, we take on the leadership and the responsibility to make a difference in our communities. And that's Miss Kiana Osborne. And then we have the Reverend Dr. Distinguished Extraordinaire, Reverend Dr. Pastor Ivan Hicks, out of Indianapolis, and he is the pastor of First Baptist North Indianapolis. He is most pastors get this D-Min degree. No, this is a PhD. He is prolific in Africana studies, African American studies, and African studies there in Charlotte. And he's one of a pastor who's a very type of pastor. He doesn't just preach from the pulpit. He puts things into play as well. He has a incubator for small businesses that he blessed me to come and teach when I was living in Indiana, and he helps businesses grow and strive. And I believe he's working with at least 10 small businesses now in the city of Indianapolis, there in the heart of the middle of America. And so, panel, we're excited about today, and we're just going to open up, and we'll start off with the question. Matter of fact, before you can go to a question, let me allow you to make your first opening statement. I'm asking the question. America's in crisis. Should we let it burn? And who wants to go first? Raise your hand. I'm going to call on somebody. I'm a professor. Matter of fact, let's go with, let's set the tone. Justin, set the tone for us today.
Glad you started with the easy one off the top.
I don't know about that, but go ahead, sir.
Should we let it burn? I have to say no. We shouldn't let it burn. But I am hopeful in this moment. I was talking with my son today, coming back from the event that Kiana helped organize, and he's 17, and so I was grateful for the opportunity for him to be there and to hear voices that need to be heard, and the systemic injustice. I long for the day that is not real. I long for the day that is not the reality. I, believe it or not, I have a granddaughter, and
Hmm.
there's nothing more than the prayer that my granddaughter will know a different United States when she gets to be my age. That the hard work that needs to be done, of dismantling systemic injustice, and to see something new and hopeful spring forth. So in that essence, I guess if it's you know, figurative, do we need to let it burn? There are definitely some things that need to burn here in this country. But the Christ follower in me says that I want to go about it in a way that actually helps restore and reconcile people. And so I guess that's how I started off there.
Okay. Okay. Next, let's go with whomever. Jump into it.
I can jump in. I like Justin's answer. I went to school, and where I went to college, our mascot was a phoenix, and the phoenix rises from the ashes. And so that was my first thought. I think to Justin's point, depending on what "let it burn" means,
Yeah.
we don't
And that's
need.
your definition too. It's not our definition. What it means to you.
Okay, we don't need to actively seek to burn down this country per se, in my opinion. But if it's burning down anyway, and if that's the only way that's going to get the attention of the people who intentionally built this country the way that it is, um, then I'm okay with letting it burn and letting us rise from those ashes into a new America that actually is uh, free for all.
Okay. All right. Very good. Now, before let matter of fact, again, the definition of "let it burn" is however you define it. And as we get more into the discussion today, I'll define it. But who wants to go next, gentlemen? Atlanta or at Indianapolis? Go forth.
I think very simply the contradiction for me as to let it burn is if we have a choice. We cannot allow those who are the oppressor prescribe for us what the methodology is going to be. And so, on the one hand, should we let it burn? If burning means we get to the table to have a more just and equitable conversation about mass incarceration, about structural racism, about income inequality. If that's what get us to the table, then more power to us. Let it burn. But once again, those who are the oppressor do not get to prescribe the prescription by which we force a new conversation. So while we can say, even in Atlanta, it is unfortunate that what is called rioting or what they would call rebellion has produced an opportunity both on the political side of this equation to kind of have a different conversation. And so, being a serious community activist, I say we take nothing off the table too soon. Because the fact of the matter is, even as we sit here tonight, the three other officers that were responsible for George Floyd's death have not been arrested, have not been charged. We saw it for our own eyes, and now we're being told we saw something else. Ahmaud Arbery, down here in Brunswick, Georgia, the killers in the massacre of that brother were not arrested. The institution had, in fact, covered them down completely. For 74 days, they were free. And it wasn't until we saw the horrific killing on tape that we began to make demands that either you arrest them or we're going to burn it down. And so I'm just like the old uh, Patrick Henry, who we call the great founder of these yet to be United States of America, who rode through town saying, "Give me liberty or give me death." I understand the frustration of the young people who are out here in the streets and those who are soldiering out. And so I say, don't take anything off the table until we get to the table, can have a real conversation.
Amen. Amen. Reverend Dr. Ivan.
Good evening, and Osahar, Pastor
Yes, sir.
Barry. Thank you for the invitation to come and to share on today with this August panel. Thank you all for sacrificing time. Look, there can be no reconciliation without confrontation, and if you have a relationship with someone and you all have a disagreement, the worst thing in the world to do is to go to the reconciliation part without working out the stuff in the middle, without having the conversations with really dealing with the underlying issues that cause the problem. And here we are in 2020, and we're suffering from a social order and races that have not been in discussion with one another. And most recently, over the last three, maybe almost 4 years, we have been polarized by a president that ran off of racial polarization, pitting one culture against the other. And so while we have had an opportunity to have our emotions stirred, we've never had an opportunity to have dialogue and discussion. There's a Truth and Reconciliation Council that was convened in South Africa after Nelson Mandela became the president there. Desmond Tutu chaired that council, and they were able to deal with the harsh reality of a racial regime that put its foot on the neck of people that had color and pigmentation, melanin, right? But because they went through a process of reconciliation, truth and reconciliation, I would venture to say that in terms of race relations, South Africa is further along than the United States of America because they had the conversation. We have to have conversations. We have to disagree. We have to let our opinions be heard. We have to make sure we are not trying to sweep it under the rug or trying to pretend like it's not there. The truth of the matter is that this country is just as racist as it was in the 50s and 60s in the height of the civil rights movement. We are just as racist now as we were before, if not more racist. And so we have to have discussions about it. Thank you for your leadership and pulling us together that we can talk about this and we can share so that conversations can take place across lines that divide us and separate us, be they gender, race, socioeconomic status. We have to make sure we're pulling together, having conversations with one another so we can move towards some type of reconciliation.
Excellent. Yesterday we had a conversation, and Professor Charles McKinney from Rhodes College in Memphis, he's chair of the Africana Studies Department and associate professor of history there. He shared with us and said that this system in America was created to fail us, and that it really is not up to us to try to fix it. I'm summarizing his words, is that it's functioning in the way that it was created to function. So it's functioning in a way to, it drew us back to our memory that in the Constitution, it said that black people were 3/5 of a person. And so he said that it's still functioning in the way they initially created it to function. So he's not shocked by how America is in turmoil. And I think it ties back into what you were saying, Dr. Ivan, that we here in America, we are brought into this system that we really haven't had the conversations to deal with what happened August of 1619 and the 400 years of us being here in America, and not really fully until this day in 2020, not fully and be able to embrace the American dream as has been articulated for so many years. So I think what they were saying earlier, with what Mr. Bozeman was saying, was that let it until we can come to the table. Maybe that's a possibility. On the other side, is it up to us to put out the fires? And then the other side, I see leaders saying, be peaceful, be peaceful in your protest. But then I remember that yesterday they said that the champion of peace, Dr. Martin King was a champion of peace, and before he went out for another march, he was killed violently. He was the champion of peace. But we hear leaders saying, be peaceful. And yes, I believe that many of us should be peaceful. I think we should be peaceful in a sense, but whose responsibility is it to bring about peace? That's my question for you now. Whose responsibility is it to bring about peace? And one other note was there were 4 officers that were present for the lynching of Brother George Floyd. It wasn't until there were protests that they arrested the one who had his foot on his neck. But he was being held down by 2 other officers. And at the same time, one officer stood and was the guard. I want people don't lose I want America, the world, not to lose focus of that fact. There were 4 officers and not one. Now I present to you the question: who should be responsible for bringing about peace? Who'd like to take on that?
Well, let's say this. Peace is not, and Dr. King says, not merely just the absence of tension. It's really the presence of what brings peace on. So do not ask me to be peaceful when you got your foot on my neck. In fact, as Malcolm said, if you put your foot on my neck, then I am obligated to ensure that you end up with half of a leg, because that's not the preservation. And so I don't want us to confuse the pacification of struggle with just we don't be in a bad relationship and I'm supposed to get beat up every day. Peace comes when people feel, that they have equality of opportunity. They have equal access to success. That my life does matter, and the fact that I'm just a black man in America is not going to subject me to excessive amounts of arrest, just excessive police interaction for no good reason. We understand what it means to live black in America. But, King said also, look, the law cannot make you love us. We're not looking for folks to love us, but it can constrain you from hanging me. And I think that's pretty important as well. And so while we've had this experience in these yet to be United States of America, at the end of the day, those young people are out here in the street because they saw what happened to Philando Castile. They're simply riding in his car. We saw what happened to Sandra Bland. Nothing happened to those individuals. We saw what happened down here in Atlanta to a 92-year-old who got shot by the police, and then they sold us a story that she was somehow selling drugs that went to the wrong house. No. We are not blind as to what is happening. The young folks are not blind as to what's happening in this country. So if you want true peace in this country in this hour, deal with the underlying issues that cause these young people to be out there, because they've seen the injustice and they've seen the way the system responded and they don't like it. And so now the attitude is tear the whole damn system down if we have to restructure it. And that's where they're coming from. The political system, the social system, the judicial system that allows for these atrocities. They go in court, we're supposed to be tried by a jury of our peers, and they get off. And so that's what we hear, the cry. The whole system has to come down, not 3 officers. The system that allows, and the system that you now see operating, where the prosecutor is already saying to you, we had intended to arrest even this until the city went up in smoke. And now they have an autopsy report that said he did not die from forced strangulation. As a factual predicate to sit up, we finna let these folks off the hook. Even if we're arrested, they're going to be, we're sitting you up to know that this is going to be just another one of these Rodney King things. What we saw a man got beat to death, but nobody's going to be held responsible. These young people are saying we're not willing to live in a world like that. We'll bring the whole thing down before we live in an unjust, wicked world like that you all have given to us.
Okay. That's good. Very good. Very good. I like the way this conversation is going freely, however you want to feel. Anybody else want to tackle that question? Who should be responsible for peace?
Well, um, those that are responsible for the unrest are also responsible for creating some type of atmosphere and environment to allow us to deal with it. How do we get to the peace? How do we get to peace? We have to deal with the reality of the situation, have clear conversations about what's going on, be honest with ourselves and with people that don't look like us, the others, so that we can determine that there's a way forward. Um, I think it is unrealistic to, as Derek Bozeman has said, I think it's unrealistic for us to expect that people that have been subjugated and treated poorly and held down and held back to be those that are peaceful. I admire nonviolence. I admire Martin Luther King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King for his work. But I also understand that if it had not been for SNCC, if it had not been for CORE, for the persons, the Black Panther Party, for Malcolm X, if it had not been for more radical people that were able to express a more radical view, then the acceptance of Dr. Martin Luther King in a nonviolent position would not have been so readily provided by our country and by persons that were going through that civil rights era. I think it's also important for us to make sure that, once again, as Derek Bozeman said, that we don't allow somebody else to try to pick our leader, and we don't allow somebody else to pick our strategy, right? So that we can bring about peace, but peace has to come about by way of vehicle, and even the vessels that are independent. And as opposed to trying to figure out who the next Martin Luther King is, and as opposed to trying to figure out whose strategy is correct, we came out of Ferguson with a philosophy that said, we call it Bama, by all means available, right? You can't choose our leader, and you can't tell me that's too radical and that we should pursue a peaceful way of moving. It was Henry Highland Garnett that was a Presbyterian preacher that coined the phrase "by any means necessary." As a preacher, he was the contemporary of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass believed in moral suasion. He's going to convince people through his oration, through talking. Let's talk our way into it. But you know what? People were able to listen to Frederick Douglass and accept Frederick Douglass and moral suasion because there was a radical Presbyterian preacher that said, "Rise now and fight. Let your motto be resistance." And so we have examples that allow us to know that there may be somebody that's mutualistic, but there are also going to be leaders that are vanguard. There are leaders that will seek to create a coalition, and there are also leaders that will seek to move out in a maverick or revolutionary fashion to do what they need to do in order to meet the goal. And so we salute and we honor and we need all of these leaders so that we can move forward, because we cannot allow the counterculture. We can't allow the people that have put us in this position to tell us how to get ourselves out of the position. Self-determination is extremely important.
Yeah, you bringing it. You bringing the fire. Now, I want to take a step back. You bringing the fire. We're going to come back to that movement where we're going with that. But put some things in the context. Justin, you wrote a piece about your interaction with George Floyd. Man, can you please tell us about George from your perspective, so we can put all this into how you view and those people who actually knew the brother?
Yeah. So yeah, 2015, me and my family moved from a little small town in the middle of central North Carolina, Sanford, North Carolina, to Houston, Texas. We lived in 3rd Ward. I was serving as a church planning resident with Resurrection Houston, the church there in the city. And the church that I served at, Resurrection Houston, their primary place of ministry there in 3rd Ward was CUNY Homes, which is a large housing project there right across the street from TSU's campus. And so I moved there August 2015, and it was at the end of the month. The church had organized a big 3-on-3 basketball tournament on the weekend there, and so I'm just coming into the city, just getting to know people at the church and getting to know residents there in CUNY Homes, and yeah, it was during the tournament was going on, and there were some games, playing, and everybody's watching. I sat down. I just happened to sit down beside George. His team was playing, and not at the time, but they were playing in the tournament, and we were sitting there, and I was kind of introducing myself, right? Like, I'm the new guy with Reds Houston, just trying to get to know everybody, and he's like, I remember it so vividly. We're sitting there talking, and he said, "Man, like, I really appreciate what y'all's church is doing here. We need more positive stuff like this in the neighborhood." And he's like, "Look around, like, nobody's worried about any nonsense right now. Everybody's just out here having a good time, man. We need this." And he said, "We, especially for these youth, we need this." And that was my first impression of meeting George. And George was the guy. No matter what we were doing out in the community, man, he was there. If he was there, he was helping. If we're having church services out there with people, he's helping set chairs out, tables up. My friend Ronnie Reconcile, Christian hip hop artist, he talked about how George was the one that would help him lug the baptism pool out there to fill it up with water when they were doing baptisms. Like, that was him, and a lot of my good brothers and sisters that knew him, even better than I did. He was the guy that kind of gave them the stamp, to enter into the neighborhood. He was the person of peace in that neighborhood that God used to open up those relationships between the church and the community. And I came in, honestly, 5 years later when I arrived. That had been going on for 5 years before I even arrived there. So, like, I got to witness just the fruit of that labor that began before me. And so, my interactions with George, my time during Houston, man, was just nothing but, man, this was a brother who loved his community, right, and wanted to see positive change happen, and was willing to do whatever he needed to do to help that take place. And so that was my impression of George. And honestly, everybody I know that knows him, that knew him better than I did, that continued to stay in touch with him through the years, like, that's you're going to get that consistent message across the board. And I think that speaks volumes to his character and to who he was as a person, because, it's the frustrating thing. I don't want to get too off the rails with it, but
no, go ahead.
There's this rhythm to this. When you talk about systemic things in place, man, you can tell it's systemic because it's got the same rhythm to it, right? Something happens. Instantly, there's this desire to assassinate the character of the person, the victim, right? Like, the victim in these instances, wait for the fact. I mean, it's frustrating to me to have these conversations with people who refuse to acknowledge. Y'all were talking about how do we get to peace, and I think speaking from the white perspective, man, until we own this, until we really take responsibility for this, it's going to be hard moving forward, right? We're talking about burning it down. I think in essence, that's what we're talking about, because, man, we bear so much responsibility in this, and it's hard to have those conversations because, instantly it's like, well, that wasn't me. How am I responsible for, what happened 400 years ago, what happened 100 years ago? Like, those kind of things come up in conversations, and man, until we take ownership, right? Because we may not have been the architect. Like, we're the ones that got ownership of this right now, right? This is what's been handed down to us. And so we can either continue to stick our heads in the sand and try to pretend nothing's there and go with status quo, or we can take up that responsibility. Like, no, we want to pivot. We want to take this thing a different way. But, we have to be able to enter into that conversation. That's, man, I can't remember who it was. Kiana can probably tell me, because I couldn't keep up with the names of everybody that was speaking today. But, man, one of the brothers that spoke, man, it just resonated. I actually wrote it down in my phone because I wanted to make sure I didn't forget it. But it was like, if to enter into this conversation, to enter into the trauma for our Black brothers and sisters is going to be a traumatic experience that we can't like enter into this conversation for real without actually feeling and experiencing what has happened. And so there's always this desire, I think, from the majority, from the people, you know, who are in positions of power, to want to talk about change and want to talk about reform and talk about all these things without actually experiencing the pain that's been caused by it. And I think that does a detriment to the honestly, I think it actually inhibits our ability to even move forward. So, yeah.
It's good words, man. But you made a good point about, you know, you represent all white people, all 300 million white people right now. So I won't put that pressure on you, but you made a good point.
Here's the thing, right? Like,
yeah.
I have had this conversation so much over the last week. It's like, I actually never enter into a conversation having to carry that weight, right? Like, people don't go into a conversation as a white person, like, now I have to speak for the entire, you know, white community. But I know for so many of my Black brothers and sisters, that's the case, right? Like, so often in the conversations, like, I'm gonna need you to speak for all Black people, right? And the weight that we put on that is, you know, it's unjust, it's unfortunate, and it's heartbreaking to me personally. And so when I say, like, I'm trying to speak for white people, like, obviously I'm the only white person in the conversation right now, but the fact is, like, man, I want to bring a different voice. I want to bring, like, there are people who are desperate to see change, and honestly, it's shaped by my faith, right? Like, the fact that Jesus Christ saved me and rescued me and met me and was able to restore my brokenness. Now he's empowered his people to go about and restore the brokenness in this world through their lives. And that's what we want to see more than anything.
Praise God. Now, Kiana, I'm going to transition from Pastor Justin to you. You were the impetus, the energy that brought many churches and different sets of people to get together. But from my understanding, you had a large portion, if not the majority of the people at the gathering, the 3,000 to 5,000 people, who were white. And so tell us how you came to organize today's vigil, and then give us your reflections of what transpired today. And then what do you hope to come from today?
Ooh, that's a lot of questions.
We'll just take one or two of them.
So it's funny. I was talking with my dad a few days ago, telling him, you know, I'm excited. I'm organizing this march. And his dad led marches. And so I was like thinking my dad was going to be so proud of me. I said, oh, there's a little bit of Frank Osborne in me. And his dad has passed away since. So I expected this very soft response from my dad. And he just immediately went into dad mode and was like, well, you better be safe out there. And so this has always been in me. I've always wanted, I marched in 2016 when Keith Lamont Scott was killed here in Charlotte. And so this has been in me for a while, and I make provocative posts on Facebook and social media fairly often, usually prayerful posts. For some reason, God used this one, and that's all I can give the credit to is God. He took this and it exploded.
So it was a post that started this?
Yes, a Facebook post.
So from a Facebook post to today and what you saw today, tell us what you saw today from the crowd and what was the energy, and then where do we go from there? And then I want to ask, after you finish talking about Charlotte's experience today, which is one experience, I want to go back to Derek, and if Derek tells us about what's going on in Atlanta. But go ahead and tell us about today for us, Kiana.
Sure. Today was amazing. I go back to the scripture about how God can do exceedingly and abundantly more than we could ask or imagine, and that's how I felt. When we initially talked, we said, okay, maybe a couple hundred people. Then more churches got involved, and we're like, okay, maybe 1,000. And then we saw on Facebook last night that we were above 2,000 people who had either said they were going or interested in going. And then we show up today, and there's helicopters circling because they need a helicopter to be able to see how big this movement is. And so it was extremely humbling, especially to see, like you said, so many white brothers and sisters out there.
Was it majority?
I don't know. So I've had people tell me that it was. I'm in a different headspace when I'm organizing and hosting something. So
right.
I feel like I don't remember. But there definitely were a lot of white people present. And I think as I listen to Derek and Ivan speak, and Justin as well, I'm still learning. And so I just hope to draw as much wisdom from people that have been doing this longer than me, to figure out what the hope and goal is of this It Ends Now movement. So I don't even know. I couldn't imagine today. So I'm just going to say that I expect God to move. And I know that when God moves, it's big. So I'm rolling with it.
Yeah. Well, I don't want you. I brought you on board knowing that you're. We talked before previously, and you were like, "I want to learn," and I wanted your youthful glory to come in this conversation because you're dealing with a couple of generals here. So I don't expect you to be able to. We could all sit down and take classes from Derek and Ivan. Matter of fact, they teach classes, so we could take classes from Derek and Ivan on this topic. But I think it's relevant. I think it's good to have your perspective and Justin's perspective because you speak from a real place and a place that, I mean, this is a cross-generational movement. And it's going to take a variety of voices that can come together in unity and speak to the enemy that exists. I heard for the very first time today a governor, maybe they said it before, but I don't recall. 20 years ago, we were talking about white supremacy, and it was like a word you didn't mention in certain crowds. Today, the North Carolina governor said one of the problems here in America is white supremacy. And man, I mean, when I was taking Africana studies, Derek, and Morris Brown, for a white person to say something about white supremacy was unheard of. And today, the governor of the state of North Carolina said that's one of the problems we have to deal with is that. Man, I almost came to tears, man. I felt like I need to go. I can stop being an activist now. I've done my job. But anyway, I'm not. But Derek, he said, no. Derek, what's going on? Tell us about Atlanta.
Well, what I said to Kiana is that, sis, no. We can follow you. I'm very clear that leadership oftentimes is about, the minister talks about the theology of time. Sometime it's your time to step forward. And so leadership is born out of struggle like this. And so yours is a legitimate voice. It is a principled voice. It is a reasonable voice. And so we look to, I'm not one of those kinds of leaders who look back and say, well, no, they need to wait till the torch pass. Some of these cats are outdated. Their methodology is outdated. Their rhetoric is outdated. And all they want to do is tell you to stop burning, but they don't want to deal with the underlying issue that got you out in the street in the first instance. So sometimes it's not for us. The leader is given a vision. Sometimes you can see it all the way through. Other times you're just going to have to organize your way through it. And so just to give you a little bit about Atlanta, Atlanta is a great fairy tale place. And now keep it 100 with you because they call it the Black Mecca. But when you come to Atlanta, you're going to see gentrification that has run out rampant. You're going to see on Wednesday, I was out picketing the police department because they were right here in the wonderful progressive city of Atlanta, locking up young boys who happened to be on the corner selling water because one of the city council members, bourgeois Negro, just got tired of looking at poor kids out on the corners hustling water. And it wasn't about let me deal with the structural issues that create poverty. As a council person, I have the resources of a $1 billion+ corporation called the City of Atlanta that I can go and see where are summer jobs, where are the hope for these folks, where is we're going to get resources in the greatest downturn of this economy since the Great Depression. But we're worried about a child who's trying to assist perhaps even his family during this pandemic and everything else that's going on by making a few extra dollars on the corner. And the directive was for the police chief to go and pick them up. Even in spite of all of that, when it came time to call for calm, the mayor's office called. I don't agree with this mayor on much public policy. But what I also didn't want to do was young people who just got swept up in the euphoria of wanting to be a protest. I want to be down. I don't want history be written and it not mentioned that I, as a 17, 18-year-old, was out here. But the problem was some of the provocateurs who had embedded themselves into the righteous movement started just wantonly breaking windows, throwing Molotov cocktails, burning up police cars. And for a 15, 16-year-old, that's exciting, right? You came to the rally that ended, but then when those opportunities showed up, they just started breaking windows all the way from downtown to Buckhead, setting stuff on fire. Now, no child, I don't believe, I don't think no mother, no black mother sent her child down there and said, "Hey, look, here's $2 extra for you, some gas, a rag, and a Coke bottle. Go and sit on Atlanta on fire." But the euphoria of getting swept up in that. And my real concern was I don't want these young people to get hurt out here, making a statement that they may not have come to make. And we saw even in Minneapolis, a young brother gets his head blown off because he goes in allegedly to a pawn shop where they were taking guns, and the owner happened to be there. And so he fires off a round. And so we can't even talk about was he justly or unjustly killed because we're dealing with the pandemonium. So in Atlanta, what you've had for 2 nights, for the first night, which was Friday, a march was called. The march ended. It was in Centennial Olympic Park. The Atlanta police, because this is Atlanta, has kind of taken a kind of laissez-faire. We're not going to be very aggressive. I think they were too passive. The crowd got very large. And then the crowd basically spray painted the CNN Center, tried to rush in there. They broke the windows out of a restaurant connected to it, and then they marched north from there. And so last night, it was a smaller gathering. National Guard is on the ground, 20 different police jurisdictions on the ground. And so last night was a very small amount of protesting. But even within that, part of this, the police get hyped up too. So police got hyped, they got over excited, and a young Morehouse student and his girlfriend happened to ride through because young people doing what young people want to do. They looking. And it ends up with all of this after quell, slow people down. Killer Mike got on TV and T.I., a bunch of folks. We joined them. Bernice King, Dr. King's daughter, just asking for calm. And in the middle of all of that last night, this Morehouse student, Spelman student, driving through the crowd, they tased the guy, right? Snatch him out of his car, tase him, throw the girl to the ground, all while the cameras are rolling and everything. So even now, in the middle of trying to quell what has been a night of looting and burning, you now got to deal with the issue of, in spite of this, in spite of all this call for calm, the police still are brutalizing our people. And so if you don't understand why these young people in the street, with everybody watching you now, that's how you're going to approach dealing with young people. And so that those two officers get fired immediately. And now the mayor and the police chief got a public relations disaster on their hand yet again. So I'm saying is that look, we who believe in freedom cannot rest till it comes, and so we don't have time to rest. We got to keep the pressure on. Your mic is not on, Osar.
So I'm challenged. I'm challenged, Brother Ivan. I'm challenged with being as a pastor, being taught and I preach and I believe in peace. I believe in being ambassador of God. I believe in being a warrior saint. I believe in prayer. I believe in loving my neighbor. I believe in even loving my enemy. I even believe the Lord will make my enemy my footstool, and that nothing, no obstacle, no challenge would hold me back from the victory that's been promised with the victory over the cross. All that being said, I'm a man, and I'm a black man. And I'm a black man, and I was in Indiana, where you live. I was pulled over 26 times by the police in a 6-year period. 26. Given one ticket, and that was thrown out because it was fake. And they said I didn't have my blinker on. So, matter of fact, I ran for mayor of South Bend, and within 2 weeks of the campaign, the police had me in a felony stop with their guns. So, it's hard to it's challenging to preach this, but then to live in a society that doesn't support necessarily what we're called to preach. And so it brought me to tears this morning, to a point where I feel the frustration of the people in the street, because the LA in me has a different natural response when we are attacked physically. But the preacher in me says that I have to maintain the order that God has given me with this call that I must keep. So as a pastor, man, speak to us about, black men in America. We are dealing with this mental frustration, in a sense, how we have to be believers of the call and maintain that call, at the same time walk as a black man in America at the same time. Speak on that for the brothers. I know I'm not the only one who has this challenge.
It's hard out here, right? That
Right.
when we look at Tamir Rice, and we look at Ahmad, when we look at Brother Floyd, when we look at all of the atrocities, not just men, but Sandra Bland. I mean, men and women of ebony hue are subject to police brutality. They're subject to death. Modern day lynchings right now is what we're dealing with, and that's why we protest. And so it's hard if you have been preaching your entire ministry something that is docile and placid. Fortunately for me, I've been talking about a revolutionary named Jesus. I've been talking about Matthew 25, that says that if we're going to get to heaven, we need to feed people that are hungry and clothe people that are naked and visit those that are sick and in prison. Fortunately for me, I've been talking about the prophet of old, and how the prophet of old has to speak truth to power, and how the prophet of old has to speak to their community as well, to let that community know that God is not pleased with them. But as well, the prophet back in the day provided relief for those that were subject to the whims of and the terror of this human existence. So those that were the lost, least, left out, the widows and children, the most vulnerable among us, that's who the prophet sought to minister to. And so in these days, these are the themes, these are the messages that we need to carry, that Jesus went down the center street, went to the city center, and went to the temple and kicked over some tables out of righteous indignation. And so we stand, what's that? Ecclesiastes or Proverbs, the 31 chapter, 8th verse says that we have to speak up for those that can't speak up for themselves. And we have to ensure that those that are being crushed receive relief. And that's what we have seen, is that with a police officer with his knee on the neck of a brother in Minneapolis. We see that, but we also remember 400 years of oppression, subjugation. We remember that we have, as a collective unit, as a group, gone through so many harsh and heinous things within this country that we have to keep these things in mind. What Naeem Akbar said, that we shouldn't cry stale tears for past injustice, nor should we celebrate even the greatness of our African past needlessly so. But we do need to understand that that there's a place where the lights have been turned out on our yesterday. And so we need to look back and see how the lights have been turned off. We need to look to see that what we're facing right now is the residual effect of slavery, the residual effect of the oppression that has come our way. And right now, we need to instruct our boys and our girls how to deal with police stops. But it all starts with sharing with them their great history, to let them know that they didn't just come from Africa, but there's a greatness in Meroe and Aswan. There's a greatness in ancient Egypt that they've come from, that there were people even in West Africa. When we came to America, we didn't come here as slaves. We came here as agricultural leaders, as politicians, as statesmen. We came here. They didn't go over there and get the weakest. They went to Africa and got the best and the brightest and the strongest. And so we have to let our people know, our children know, that we've come from a great heritage, no matter what the circumstances are right now, and no matter what they teach or do not teach us in the school systems. We come from great people. And so that's something that needs to be instilled in our young people, so that we have a sense of heritage and a sense of hope beyond the heinous nature of the situations we're dealing with right now. And that's the object, and that is the responsibility of the preacher and the prophet, to ensure that hope goes into the mind and the heart of the young people within our community that see this, and all they resonate to is the despair. It's our obligation and responsibility to provide hope beyond the situation we're in. We have to continue to speak and preach and speak up.
Amen. Amen. Now I'll put this to Justin, and then we'll go around the table here. I think it's a good education. We don't have to register for this class. We can just take the class here today.
I'm wondering if can I get credit for this?
Oh man, that's nice. This is a question I have for everybody. Do you think the former police officer, Derek Chauvin, will get convicted? And that's the gentleman who had his knee on Brother George's neck. Justin, what do you think?
That's me first, right? I guess we're supposed to answer honestly when we answer.
Yeah, honestly.
I'm not hopeful. That's just real. I feel like every time I go into one of these situations, there's hope that there will be justice served, and I feel like, if I'm being honest, man, it's every time I feel like, there's no way there won't be a conviction, and then no conviction happens, and it's hard not to be cynical, and it's hard not to be jaded by what you see. And like I say, even that preliminary autopsy report that they released is almost like, here they go, laying the groundwork, right? Like, as if like it was George's fault, what happened to him. And man, I want to believe with all my heart that justice will happen and there will be a conviction. But if I'm being honest, it's hard not to be cynical in moments like this. But I am hopeful. Go ahead, Jan. Yeah.
I was just going to say, we saw it in New York City with Eric Garner. He was saying the same words. And that ended in a hung trial.
Yeah.
Right.
It's amazing how the burden of proof is on the victim in moments like this, right? Because they don't get to share their side of the story. They don't get to speak. And so, I mean, honestly, even the language, that we hear so often, the systemic nature of this stuff just blows my mind that it's not like, I don't understand how people can be so blind to it, right? Because they even tried out the same talking points. We always talk about talking points with like politics, right? That politicians have their like script that they go by, but man, even in these, right? Like it's often like, so often the officer fears for his life, right? So now the burden of proof is, I mean, if you listen to the statement that's put out, you can tell that this has been crafted. Like this has been wordsmith because it's the same exact words every time, right? Like this is it's almost like it's like boilerplate, right? And they just change the names when they release these statements. Like it's
it is
distributed, right? And so because now you're laying the groundwork, right? Because now when it finally does go to trial, I mean, I'm grateful for arrest. I'm grateful that at least it goes into the process. But when the burden of proof falls on the victim in this who had their life taken, it's hard not to be cynical about it. I was having this conversation with somebody the other day, and forgive me because I can't remember who it was. It was the Supreme Court case revolving around pornography, and one of the Supreme Court justices says, I don't know what it is, but I'll know it when I see it. I feel like every time I know it when I see it, right? Like we know it when we see it. Like when these videos, we get to witness this. I feel like every reasonable person can look at these videos from, we could go down. Kind of brought up Eric Garner. Like, how could you not watch that and see it? Like, it's not like this is like,
it's systematic. It's systematic. I think you said it right. I'm an old speechwriter. I'm a former speechwriter. I still write speeches and ghostwrite. But it's a boilerplate. If it's already worked before, why not use it again until it's shown itself not to work? Derek, what do you think? Do you think that he'll get convicted?
One of the things I've learned is to not to put hope in an unjust system. I never put my hope in this system that has never produced justice for Black people. And so the question should be, should he? Now, that shouldn't even be a defense that can be given for what we saw. The man is detained. He's on the ground. You could have put him in a paddy wagon or put him in a police car, drove him to jail. But because this officer in his white supremacist mindset makes sure that is known that he's the judge, jury, and executioner of what at best we've been told now was a $20 transaction. So while this brother is begging for his life, he's sitting there with his hands in his pocket and his knee across his throat, and is being protected by the other part of the establishment that you're asking me to put my hope in. So I don't have any hope in an unjust system. But what my hope is in our people. And that is that he should want to stay. I mean, we're going to get to a point in our maturity where he would rather be in jail, because to be out would put his life in too much peril. So you don't just continue to be able to put your throat on the necks of poor and oppressing Black people and just get to walk home and eat a sandwich. And so you talk about that peace. That brother had absolutely no peace at all. And if the underlying crime was trying to slip a $20 bill for some food, this is how it ends. Now, the problem with all of this is not what we already know. This was a dirty cop. The man had been involved in 3 shootings prior to killing this man. And because it's just like your grandmama used to say, boy, when we go in this store, don't you steal nothing out this store. Because grandma would then tell you what? If you would lie, you would what? Steal. If you steal, you would do what?
If you steal, you will kill. Yes, yes.
So when we let him get away with firing at 3 different people, injuring them, let him get away, cleared it, looked in his personnel file, he has 12 excessive use of force cases. Hell, that's the mayor's and the governing authority fault that he was even still on the job, because he should have been fired the first time he did that. And so when you don't fire them, when you don't, there's no repercussions for him, then he's feeling emboldened. He sat on that brother's neck, Brother Floyd neck, while those people on the sidewalk begged him and begged the others to get him off. And they threw him in the car, in the ambulance, like a sack of trash. And we're supposed to preach about a happy sermon about that, and we're supposed to just go in the house and wait for this system to deliver for us? No, 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 no. These young people understand what's going on, and that's why they're in the streets, stand up the place left and right, and because they don't believe, because they too have seen what you and I've seen, that this system rarely, if ever, produces real justice for us. And all it's waiting to do now is to consume the next victim. And unless they had started burning and looting in Minneapolis, they probably would have never arrested the guy.
That's a true statement. That's a true statement. True statement. Kiana, do you think former police officer will be convicted? And Ivan, you'll be next.
I'm going to be the different one and say, I think he'll get convicted, but not of first-degree murder. I think
it's third degree. It's third-degree murder right now and manslaughter.
Okay.
That's the charge, which is pretty light.
Yeah.
In comparison. Do you think he'll be convicted for that?
In listening to Derek speak, and I agree, we have to watch the patterns in history. Hearing Justin talk about boilerplates, I also feel like I've seen this pattern of sprinkling a little hope for our people. And so I feel like there's so much unrest. I saw a map that showed almost every state in this country having protests, having marches. And so knowing that there's an election coming up, knowing the effects that angering so many voters could have, I think there's a possibility that they may use this as a sprinkle of hope to quiet people down so that we won't persist in this movement to make lasting change. So that's, and again, I'm the young one on the call, so maybe, I haven't witnessed enough injustice, but I feel like I've witnessed these times, even with OJ, when when he ended up not being convicted, Black people were so hopeful in that, feeling like, wow, we can actually be convicted of something and not, be arrested for something and not end up convicted. And then, just a few years later, people are getting arrested for things they don't commit.
Right.
So, yeah,
Here's a fact. Here's the fact for you to chew on. The first time a police officer was convicted for killing a Black man was within the last 10 years. Ivan.
Yes. So I believe that there is more hope for a conviction with a third-degree murder charge and a manslaughter charge than a first-degree murder charge.
Agreed.
First-degree murder charge is a charge that it's really hard. It's harder to prove. And it is usually what, in this instance, people would get because the prosecutor would believe that nobody's going to convict a police officer of first-degree murder, right? Third-degree murder, manslaughter, those are charges that appear to have come from a prosecutor that actually wants a conviction, and as opposed to going for the harsher, harder first-degree murder, put some thought into actually what could be convictable. Having said all of that, we've been at this too long. we know the way this thing works, right? And not only is there a distinct possibility that this police officer and certainly the other three that haven't even been charged yet will get off scot-free. But as well, there'll be GoFundMe pages set up, and at least one of the four will be millionaires by the end of this week, because that's what is supported by this country we live in. And if somebody kills a black man in kill a nigga season, then they're going to set up some type of crowdfunding, and that person is going to get a better job, live in a better house, drive a better car, and be revered by postmodern KKK folk that are members of the FOP in most areas.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I want to point this out. When I ran for mayor of South Bend, I was in the back, and I went to the FOP. You mentioned FOP. I went to the FOP in South Bend, Indiana, and there was a room full of police officers, and we were lined up to be interviewed by them. And you may know this one guy. His name was Pete Buttigieg. He was with me. He ran for some office of president, something like that recently. But when we got in there, everybody was white. It was like a sea of white men. And in the city of South Bend, we do have some black officers. But what was shocking to me was the lack of black people. There was not a black person in the room. And come to find out, the black officers don't even participate with the FOP because of the racism within the police department that nobody talks about. So they have to have their own separate organization. Some are organized and recognized and some are not. But they're not really involved with the white officers because of how racist the police department is. But nobody talks about this. Nobody talks about it. And so there's a systematic issue that needs to be dealt with, that we up here, the system allows to paint this portrait of there's not even unity within the police departments in America. I don't even talk about the Los Angeles Police Department with Rodney King. There's a whole nother, I'll leave it alone. I can't handle that. But the question now is, I want to present to you guys, Ivan, you mentioned that today's technology has the GoFund pages. We've seen GoFund pages emerge after these situations where people are they're raising lots of money for people, even when they're assumed to be or maybe get charged. They're raising money for them. But so, what do you think beyond GoFundMe pages? If he's not convicted, what is America going to do? Who wants to go first? How's it going to react? Now, we've seen the plethora. Kiana mentioned that almost every state has some protest. But, what's America going to do? I was at Morris Brown in college when OJ was found not guilty. And the exuberation was high. It was, woo! It was exciting. I was at the HBCU. But around the corner at the other school, it wasn't the same reaction when OJ got off. So who wants to take this on? If he's not convicted, how is America going to react?
Well, here's the thing. Black America understands, and young people are beginning to understand that racism is just not about the guy carrying a rebel flag marching through Charlottesville, right? Racism as a vertical system of oppression operate in every endeavor of our lives. And what do you mean? All right. So when the Ku Klux Klan got through lynching and murdering in the South, their manifesto within their own documents say, look, we're not going to continue to be we see what is emerging here. We see the coming of blacks in positions of power and authority, and we're not going to be able to just ride around. In 1972, Maynard Jackson is elected first black mayor of the major southern city. That's 1972. We're just coming out of the assassination of King and a bunch of other stuff in the 60s. So these guys said, look, we need to begin to update our the way we do business. We will begin to go into the police departments. We'll be able to go into law schools and end up on your judges and on your benches. And so you trying to figure out why you were so exuberant about O.J. Simpson. It wasn't that we were so crazy about O.J. Simpson, because O.J. Simpson had walked away from the black community decades ago. Did not self-identify with black people. Married interracially, which is his absolute choice. Marry who you love. But we had no affinity with him until we saw this system try to heap on him what we thought was an injustice. Whether he did the crime or not, I'm not going to even argue with you with that. But you ask me, I will tell you, yeah, I think he did it. But beyond that, we just saw a black man with some resources. And
Yes.
another brilliant black man, Johnny Cochran. We were really cheering for Johnny Cochran. We could give a damn about OJ, to be honest with you. We were cheering that he was a black man who had an audacity to take on this system of oppression that was headed first by white lords. He walked
Yes.
in, and the brother is brilliant. We were just cheering for that brilliant man to beat the system. And guess what? He did. And so we weren't so excited about OJ. We was excited that a black man beat this system. And so we are hopeful. And let me say this, in terms of where we are, well, I think this generation is getting it even more so than we did. And I'm just 54 next week. I love the black and white coalition. I love our white allies who are stepping forward in this hour and saying, no, we got to speak up. The silence of the white church is appalling. But they also were silent on the issue of slavery. Because guess what? They benefit from that system. If you take the money of the slave trade out of the Catholic Church, it will fold up tomorrow. And so at the end of the day, we need our white allies to speak truth to power in corridors. You don't have to lecture me. Go and lecture back in your side of town and tell people, what we saw was wrong. I don't care what color he was. If that was a white man, I'd be speaking out against it. I'm against the death penalty. It doesn't matter whether you black or white. So I think the key issue now becomes, I'm excited for these young people because they're finding their voice. Do I agree with all their tactics? No. But do I agree with the tactics of the oppressor? Absolutely not. So I'm not willing to cancel out what these young people are saying over and against what those who have the greatest part of this. Because look, if they had arrested this officer, arrested the other three, did like what tonight this mayor has done, those two officers who were seen tasing that Morehouse student and that Spelman student, they fired on the spot. She didn't ask for no review board of the fraternal order of police. And the reason the FOP is all white because it's holding up that same bastion of white supremacy of the white boys who came into the organization for the express reason of continuing to terrorize under the sanction and cover of law. They're just doing it with a badge. And they do that in every city. They find a way to coalesce and work together, even within these police departments. That's why you have even an Asian officer out there who knew that guy was absolutely wrong, but he would not open his mouth.
Who's next? Kiana, help us out. What's going to happen in America if he's not convicted?
Man, I have heard historians talk about based on patterns in history, that America is due for a civil war. And I have to say that I think it's brewing. If that is true, based on patterns of history, that seems to be brewing. I think you guys have talked about it. There's a stark difference in how two groups of people would respond if he is not convicted. And those two groups of people, the tensions are rising between those two groups of people. So I don't know what exactly will happen, but I don't think it'll be pretty.
Okay, all right. Justin, and then Ivan. And then I just brought on, before we get started, before Justin starts, Reverend Conrad Tillard. And we tried to see you earlier, brother. I don't know what happened. We're glad to have you right now, my friend. And so we're just going to...
Can you see me and hear me?
We see and hear you well. Thank you for joining us.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you for joining us.
Great.
I'll come back to you shortly.
Good to be here.
He's
Yes,
frozen.
sir.
Okay,
Yes,
good
sir.
to be here. Thank you.
Yes. Justin, please.
How will America react? I'm not convicted. I'm with Kiana a little bit on this. There's definitely I'm 39 years old, so I'm too young for the 60s, right? Like I'm too young for the for that period. I've only been able to read about it. So there's definitely something different in this moment. I feel like where we're at right now, there's definitely something. So the truth is, I mean, this has been, at least in my entire life, this is not like this has happened over and over, right? But there is definitely something I feel tangibly different in this moment. The psyche, I would say, maybe of the American population. I'm hopeful that the reaction would be one of, if he's not, so we're talking about if he's not convicted.
Right. Let's go straight forward. Just lay it out.
Yeah, no, I'm hopeful that maybe the scales are tipping. Maybe just because after today, the event Kiana helped organize, I've been encouraged so much over the last day. Today, I'll just say today. This week has been horrible for me personally.
Mm-hmm.
Today has been much needed. It even started before the rally today. I was able to be at a gathering of outside on somebody's farm at a local church, the Convergence Church, where we have kind of settled with in this season for us.
Mm-hmm.
Pastor Brian Nottinger, I know Barry, you know him.
No, Brian. Yep.
And man, a predominantly white congregation who devoted the entire beginning of this morning to lamenting and to speaking truth about what happened. Open the door for people to respond, to speak about it, and then man, we spent an intentional time of prayer just over this. And I can honestly say, growing up in white church my whole entire life, I've never seen that before, so that gives me hope. And then honestly, I have been encouraged by a lot of brothers and sisters in other churches, predominantly white churches, who are, me and my wife having this conversation, like, there's something different that's going on right now. Like, people who, especially people who I think I've known over the last few years personally, that have been indifferent and have not engaged in the conversation, are actually like, this is like, it's like at this point it's been too much to do something about it.
So do you think, I'm sorry to interrupt, do you think, are you saying that America's going to come together if he's not convicted? Is that where you're going? Is that the hope that you have after this morning service with Brian?
I got that tension in me, Barrett. I got that tension in me, like, you know.
It's okay.
The people of God encourage me so often, and I feel hopeful in that moment. But when we're talking about America in general, I know that's not the reality of the country as a whole. And so, I think you've seen it played out in the videos and reporting we've seen of the things going on across the country, that there is a general sense of I think unrest and refusal to accept the status quo anymore when it comes to the system.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hopeful in that, but man,
it's okay to be hopeful.
Yeah, no,
it is hopeful.
And I don't want to lose hope, and I'm not going to lose hope. But the reality of it is I definitely can see where, you know, as Kiana said, like, if he's not convicted at all, it could have the opposite effect of what I'm hoping.
Well, if he's not convicted, let me help you out here.
Yeah.
If he's not convicted, there's going to be an uprising. That's how it's going to be.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to dance around it.
Sure.
I'm going to lay it out for you.
Yeah.
People are going to get busy in the streets. If they're getting busy without them being arrested, if they're not convicted, they're going to get busy. And that's the nature of humanity right now. Mm-hmm. Also, keep in mind, we talked about Civil War. There's no, when we study history, there's no dominant civilization that maintained control longer than 500 years. No empire. So if we do the math with America, I'm just pointing it out. If we do the math in America, we're approaching 500, if we're not in 500. So, Ivan, and then I'm going to bring in my dear friend, Conrad Tiller. Ivan.
Yeah, very quickly, the nature of kingdoms is that they rise and fall. And I think that what we are seeing right now is the deterioration of the America that most of us grew up in. And we never thought that we would be at the position or in the position that we're in right now. And what happens in this instance if he is not convicted, as Pastor Barry has said, there will be uprisings in the streets that will cause violence and rioting and death. I think that it will be that severe. There were 3 people that were shot. One died here in Indianapolis, Indiana, yesterday in the midst of protests and riots in the city of Indianapolis that has never known a protest, never known a riot during the civil rights movement. Kennedy King, that's the legacy of Indiana. So in the midst of this environment that is usually very tame, we have fires in the streets and protesters and bullets and tear gas and rubber bullets and bullets, I understand, with tear gas in them, some new fancy stuff, right? All of that is going on. If they are not convicted, what's going on right now will be protracted. It will be exponentially worse. Now, when it comes to civil war, the truth of the matter is that we don't have the guns, right? That for 400 years, while we have been dealing what we have been dealing with, they've been stockpiling guns.
Yes.
That's why the NRA is so powerful. That's why we have some of the laws that we have that we can't get rid of when it comes to semi-automatic weapons and holding manufacturers liable. All of these things do not take place because of a gun lobby from the NRA in Washington, D.C. that does not allow laws to be passed. And as well, where we are right now, we have to keep in mind that there's no possible way that an uprising from those that are subjugated within this society and victimized, those that are historically victimized and those that are historically subjugated have not been stockpiling guns. And so a physical war of guns is slaughter for those of ebony hue.
Yeah, it has been that since China. With the founding of black powder, gunpowder. So you're right. I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead. You good? All right.
I'm done.
All right, very good, very good. Now, a couple of things before I bring on Comrade Tiller. I want to introduce again Justin Bowles, who's here, Pastor Reconcile. To be somebody's doing is acting up. Derek Bozeman, who's from the city of Atlanta. He's a former councilman there in the city of Atlanta. Now he's a radio host there in Atlanta. We have Kiana Osborne, who's a community organizer who organized her first vigil today. She thought we were going to have 200 people, then 1,000 people, but we heard there were about 3,000 to 5,000 people that were there, cross section of both white and black people. And then we have Reverend Dr. Hicks from First Baptist North Indianapolis Church, where he's the pastor. And now we're bringing on Reverend Comrade Tillard, and I see that he is putting up his picture, and we don't see him physically in the video, but thank you for coming. Something about Reverend Tillard is the fact that he is unique. He's unique in the fact that he didn't come into the pastorate initially as he's born Christian, went to the University of Penn. He's a Ivy League graduate. He studied at some of the finest institutions in the land. He had an awakening. Let me tell you, he was the national youth leader for the Nation of Islam. When I first met Comrade Tillard, I was a student activist in Los Angeles. I was president of the Black Student Unions, about 100 different campuses in California. And he came and I met him. I had a sweater on and some shorts. I'm a California kid, that's how we dress. And he had on his bow tie and suit. And we had this conversation. And we've been connecting so far for years. He's the highest ranking leader within the Nation of Islam to depart and become a pastor. He is now a Christian pastor. I don't have the name of the church in front of me. there in New York, and he was the first Christian hip hop minister. And so, pastor, first Christian hip hop pastor, he had the organization called Change there in New York. And so he's been advisor to some of the most well known musicians in the land. But Conrad, as you join us today, the question we have before us is if this officer Derek Chauvin is not convicted, what will happen? But I want to transition to this to go a little further. Just share with us your thoughts since you're coming into the conversation. Where is America going?
Well, thank you very much, Pastor Barrett, my dear friend, and many of us, many of you do not know how close we became as comrades in the city of Boston 20 years ago when I pastored the Nazarene Elliott Congregational Church of Roxbury. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay.
We hear you well.
And so I'm happy to always show up when you ask me to. Let me just throw this out there. I want everyone to think about this. We are in the midst of a global pandemic declared by the World Health Organization. Everything in the universe has changed. Movies have shut down. Broadway, the Great White Way. No March Madness. No NBA. No NFL. No Major League Baseball may not get started. The worldwide soccer program is shut down. Schools have been closed. Graduations. There have been a total of 28.4 million operations that have been postponed or canceled because of COVID. 2.3 million of those have to do with cancer. The Little League World Series has never, ever not taken place since 1947. The Queen of England has canceled all of her public events for the first time in her 68-year reign. Wimbledon has been going since 1877, and they only stopped briefly during World War I and World War II. The Boston Marathon, it's been going on since 1897. All of these things and many, many more have completely shut down. The world is a new reality. We're in a new normal. And yet we in this country have continued to see blacks murdered by police. That has not changed. And so that tells you, it's what Dr. Du Bois said, that the critical question of the 20th century was the question of race. And I would say to you that it's the seminal question of the 21st century as well. If all of those things and many more have changed, and yet we still see African Americans, Breonna Taylor, and many others who have been killed and brutalized by police, that tells me that indeed the most intractable problem is not class, it's not gender, it's not sexuality, it's not even political, but it's the question of race, where we continue to see this issue revisit. It's the one problem that we do not seem to be able to solve. We have been able to make progress, marked progress in every other area. And yet this seemingly absurd notion that blacks can be killed in the street by police officers for petty crimes as small as someone passing a counterfeit bill, as he was alleged to have done. And so I'm deeply concerned about that. I'm happy to see the young people out in the street. I think we need to watch the agent provocateurs and anarchist groups that will seek to seize this moment. And I hope the church will take an advantage of this opportunity to be able to stand up and simply say that we have to be able to. I mean, it happens in red states, blue states. It happened under, no sense in blaming this all on Trump. Because Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown were killed under Obama. It has happened across the country, no matter whether it's blue state, red state. And so I'm hoping that we'll stand tall in this hour and continue to raise our voice and say this is wrong. We cannot continue. It cannot continue to be okay that blacks are wantonly murdered for being black sleeping, for being black driving, for being black doing whatever, holding a brush, a comb, etc., etc.
Good words of wisdom. Good words of wisdom. Before we come towards the end, but I want to give you all an opportunity. This is the question we're presenting now. What positive outcomes should we expect after the protest concludes? And I present this also. You can use this time to shape and form your closing thoughts. Is how do we come with a resolution? Yes, the provocative question was, should we let America burn? That was to generate some comments. But really, as ministers of the gospel, we are called to preach hope. We are called to preach the gospel, the good news. And at the end of the day, we're called, even if our own Lord and Savior was assassinated, lynched, held over the cross, and crucified, we still have a responsibility to maintain giving people a hope of tomorrow. So before we close out, what are the positive things that we can leave people with tonight? People who are angry, who are bitter, who are frustrated, who are in the streets, who want to go to war, who want to fight. What are the positives?
So one of the things that I see is that we're together. This pandemic has caused us to even pull that tag that we're in this thing together, right? We're all in this together, right? For the pandemic. But what I've seen with the protests that are taking place, just as we hear about the Queen City in Charlotte, that they had a protest today, 10,000 folk were there, right? And the majority did not look like the majority of the people on this panel, right? Mm-hmm. And so that means that there are people from other sides of the aisle. There are people from other sides of the track. There are people that we historically other that we are now in position to make relationships with and to create coalition beyond some ties that historically divide us. This racial tension in the United States of America now is going to negatively affect not just people in the barrios and the ghettos, but it is going to affect people that are in the suburbs, and people are going to have to deal with the reality of the racial tension within the United States of America, no matter how buffered you feel yourself to be by your creature comforts and your zip code. Yes, all of us are going to have to deal with the reality of what's going on right now. We're going to have some serious conversations. How does this change, and what are the positive outcomes? Maybe we can move toward that conversation or those conversations that lead toward true reconciliation. Maybe this will open our eyes. And so while we do look realistically at the possible conviction or lack thereof of a policeman in Minneapolis, as we look at the heinous crimes that have been propagated against people of color by people in blue over these past years, almost a decade now, it's been heightened by the cell phones and by the ability we have to create images and transmit them immediately. These are problems and pains that we faced down through the years that are now coming to light because of social media and technology. And as we continue to wade through this season, we need to ensure that we are working well with one another and finding people that have a similar outlook. And despite the fact that people might not look quite like us, and we might not think that they're the usual suspect, or that they could be a person that we work with, we need to make sure that we are open to that, because just as we see in this call on today, there are persons that are all concerned about our entire nation. They're concerned about the children of this world that are growing up, experiencing more hate than we have ever seen before. And so positive outcomes, more communication, and hopefully there can be some reconciliation.
Very good. We'll go in this order. This is your last statements. This is good. Kiana next, Justin, Derek, and then Conrad. You have the last word, and then I'll close this out. Kiana, please.
Yeah, I definitely want to emphasize and show my support and agreement with what Dr. Ivan just said. I think that's one of the most positive outcomes of this, is that there's community, there are people coming together. Even Derek mentioned earlier the fact that, or actually, Barrett, you might have mentioned this, the governor of North Carolina called it for what it is. And so some of what we saw today is that people who have been silent are deciding not to be silent anymore. And so it seems like that's the positive outcome. But I will just say there is not going to be any lasting positive impact from this unless people continue to lead, continue to speak up, continue to take action. And we've seen it far too many times where protest ends, everything dies down, and people just go back to life as it was. And so I do think that we have to be intentional about ensuring that there are larger positive outcomes, like people having conversations and relearning American history, elevating leaders of color, and trusting the narratives that people of color tell about their lives and the things that they experience. So we have to be intentional to make those things happen. Even policy change, I think, would be a dream come true. But I do think that we need to celebrate some of the other wins as well. And so I appreciate that some of those have been shared today from some of you, that there are people who haven't been speaking out before, who are now, and there are people coming together in ways that they haven't before.
Excellent. Justin.
Yeah, so, man, I appreciate what all of you have brought to this conversation. And I've been thinking here, like, that's the hope that we have, right, as followers of Jesus, as sons and daughters of the King, that we have a God that promises that this all will be restored. And if I understand my Bible correctly, that the people of God are called in this moment to usher in the kingdom of God, that we're called to subdue the earth like we were in the garden. And that what that means is that we live out these lives that seek to redeem and restore what's broken in front of us. And so my hope and what I believe positive that's coming out of this is that the church, and honestly, I think it is tied in maybe with the whole COVID-19 pandemic as well. You know, we've kind of all been sent to our homes for a little while, right? We haven't been able to gather. We haven't been able to and really think about like who is the church and what are we supposed to be doing? And so I'm hopeful that, you know, this time God's just been stirring in our hearts a desire to be the church, right? A desire to be the people of God. And that now in this moment, especially for us right here in the United States, in this moment, it's like God's like, okay, like I've been stirring your hearts. You've been, you know, you've done all the reading, right? And now it's time to like put it into action, right? It's time to demonstrate to the world that's all watching us right now what it means to be residents of the kingdom, to be these sojourners, these aliens in a foreign land. And man, my hope and prayer is, I was just so encouraged having a conversation today coming home from the rally that Kiana helped put on today with my 17-year-old son. And like him having a passion, like he recorded all the speakers, like he was listening to it again, like to see him become in that moment so passionate about what we're talking about gives me hope that we are starting. And also I feel like there's a realization that, you know, it took us centuries to get to where we're at. And so it's not going to be this overnight, solution. But my hope, the positive, is that we're going to have more people who are committed to the marathon and think about that next generation, man. I think about my faith, right? I heard a pastor, I can't remember who it was that said it, but we need to look at this thing like we're planting orchards, right? And like if you're planting orchards in the beginning, there's a whole lot of work and you don't see any fruit from it. But that with it carefully cared for and over time, that orchard's gonna bring forth a bounty, like a harvest. And so I think we just have to be faithful to be good stewards of what God's put right in front of us right now, and trust Him that He's going to bring forth, the growth in it. And so that's it, man. We keep fighting. We fight every day. Like we wake up and it's like, you know what? We're gonna fight for justice. We're gonna fight for the things that God is passionate about today. And I think it's one of those things that over time, if we're faithful day after day, we'll see the change that we want to see happen. That's positive, and that's the hope I have of where we're going in this moment.
Excellent. Mr. Bozeman.
Yes, sir. Well, let me say this. For those of you all who are the proclaimers of the gospel, I am not. I am one who's after God's heart. But at the end of the day, our gospel is temporary to reach and speak to the concerns of our people. Otherwise, is nothing more than just sounding brass. And so, what our people want to hear now is truth. What we want is very simple. We want y'all to stop killing us. We want the system that has allowed for the mass murder, mass incarceration of black bodies, black and brown bodies to stop. We want the same justice, as Elevator says, until the life of a black man, woman, and child means the same in America as the life of a black woman and child, man, woman, and child, then we are at war. And we cannot pull these institutions down by being nice. We can't pull them down by just dancing around them. We got to have them very clear and cogent and sober conversations. And that is, if you can look, whether you're a preacher or layperson, if you can look at that police officer, essentially choke the life with his knee, and you can find anything socially, culturally, or morally redeeming about them, then I just flat out don't have no use for you. I don't have no time to reform you, pray for you, lay hands on you, make you see it differently. I think it's a time of separation and a time of choosing. You have to choose you this day who you will serve. And we got to, what these young people are saying, black and white, young and old, and this is the hope that I see in this, that there is an emergence of a new voice. And that my prayer is that people just like Kiana will come out of here with a very clear voice. And I say to you, sisters, don't put your age on the table, because we got some old fools who are out here ain't gonna do not one thing. They're not going to strike a blow towards freedom, and they ain't gonna call anybody together. They tired, they scared, and they too tied to this system. They're not trying to bring the system of white supremacy down. They're just trying to find a better seat in it. And so what we need is people who understand that it is a time for us to come together. But I'm not willing to come together if I got to sit there and explain to you why this brother should be living and this officer should be in jail, and the other three who are going to be in jail should be in jail with him. I have a simple motto now. I don't argue with folks that Harriet Tubman would have shot. I don't even have time to waste no energy trying to convince you otherwise. I've got to go out and work with those who want to be free. And undoing racism is a learned behavior. You don't come out being racist. That is a taught behavior. And you don't come out as a black man and woman being inferior. You've been taught that you are inferior. And it is reinforced and inculcated in every institution, including the church. And so when we won't even get on that. But if I walk in your church and I can't see myself in the deity, I walk right on out just as fast as I can.
Yeah.
I clearly understand that is a theological bent in which you're teaching that don't work for the liberation of my soul. My soul has to be liberated. If you free your mind, and your backside will follow. And so I think the beauty of this is we're living at a defining time. Some see it as dangerous, but I see the Kionas, a sister who had the audacity to make the call. Man can plant, and the water can water, but only God can grant increase. So I'm praying for increase in insight for young people, for preachers like this one, who would dare take challenge his contemporaries. Because Southern Baptists, they still teach Negroes get to the back, and they consider themselves as being a theologically a sound center of understanding of the works of Jesus Christ. And so, at the end of the day, cast down your bucket, as Booker T. Washington said. Cast down your bucket where you are. Make a difference. Plant yourself in the community where you are. Make as much difference as you can, and the world will be a better place. And the rest of it is going to have to be taken care of by those who say, I'm not taking nothing off. There's the tree shakers, and then there's the jelly makers. I tend to be a tree shaker. Y'all can go in and cut deals, but just don't forget those of us who are willing to shake this tree out here. Don't go in and cut the deal based on your own selfish interest, and forget the tree shakers out here in the field. Let's all get justice for our people, because it's getting injustice for them. We're just asking America to be true to what she said on paper, as Dr. King said. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and among them a life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness. That's all we want. Don't get in my way while I'm pursuing happiness, and I won't get in yours. Don't put your knee on my throat when I'm trying to just breathe, and then I won't have to put my knee on your throat when you might be slipping. Period.
All right. I'm not gonna argue with folks that Harriet Tubman would have shot. I love that line. That's a sermon in that. The Reverend Conrad Tillard.
Yes. Well, first of all, I am just excited about being a part of this conversation. I wish I could have been on longer. I thank all of you for your contributions, because the long lens of history has taught me that there is no one way. Indeed, we have to approach this struggle from a multiplicity of directions. And one of my many great teachers in my life was Dr. James Hal Cone. And Dr. Cone understood the significance of Martin, but he also understood the significance of Malcolm as well. And so when you talk about Brother George Floyd and Tiana Taylor and all of the victims of white racism, police brutality, you're essentially talking about the tradition of martyrs that includes people like Emmett Till and the 4 little black girls that were killed at 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. And it goes back to our first landing on these shores. And so we have to continue to keep the many traditions alive. Bishop Richard Allen was correct, and Absalom Jones, but so was Bishop Henry McNeil Turner and Nat Turner and David Walker. And so we come from a people that have challenged this nation in many, many different ways, and we must continue to do that. There's great optimism as far as I'm concerned, because though our struggle has been long, it's been protracted. And as Reverend Jesse L. Jackson says, when we fight, we win. And perhaps these incidents keep happening because when we stop fighting and when we don't have these incidents, we spend our money in the strip clubs, and we are consumed with Housewives of Atlanta and hip hop, all the hip hop TV programs, et cetera, et cetera. And so these are gentle reminders to my children and to young people that we haven't arrived in the promised land. And so while we're throwing up money and while we're doing all those things, there's a lot of work that has to be done. But I'm hopeful. James Weldon Johnson said, "We have come over a way that with tears has been watered. We have come treading our blood through the path of the slaughter, out from our gloomy past, till now we stand at last with the white gleam of our bright star, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. And so that gives me hope. Dr. King said the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward right. And I'm confident because I have seen us go from the outhouse to the courthouse, to the state house, to the White House, and we even had old Meghan Markle in Buckingham Palace. And so we just have to keep fighting. We just have to remain vigilant. But most of all, I leave you with this thought. And here's what I preached today at Flatbush Tompkins Congregational Church. And this is the key piece that we have to remember is, what shall we say of these things, Paul, in Romans chapter 8? If God be for you, who can be against you? What will separate us from the love of Christ? Hardship, distress, persecution, famine, nakedness, peril, the sword, a knee, a pistol. None of it will separate us from the love of Christ. And we just have to stand together, turning to each other and not on each other, and know that we are 100% right in our demand, as Malcolm said very clearly, that we deserve as a people on this earth and this society to have freedom, to be protected, for our lives to be valued. And we have the right to stand up by any means necessary. And so I hope the church will rise up in this hour and will not shrink from this very important moment to have our voices heard. The young people now, we have to be careful that the anarchist groups don't get them. But if the church is quiet, if we're so interested in form and fashion and what we have on and what color the bunting in the church is, or what color we have in the sanctuary, then the young people will deem us irrelevant. And we're not irrelevant because we've come this far by faith. And that's what we have to continue to do. So thank you for this conversation. And let's just keep fighting wherever we are. You know, let's just keep fighting, because as Reverend Jackson said, when we fight, we win.
We win. Very good. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I want to share with these thoughts with you. I don't have anything planned. I really don't even have an answer to it all. But I know this. There needs to be a prophetic voice from from preachers, from ministers, from activists. There needs to be a prophetic voice. We need to be the ones who stand in the forefront of this movement and say, for God I live, and for God I will die. And make that proclamation with the understanding that, like Jesse said, it's like, we don't lose. I think Justin said it best. One thing he said was, we're aliens in this foreign land. We're just passing on through. And we get to the point where we're not afraid of the gospel. We're not afraid of what comes our way. There's some freedom in that. There's some freedom in understanding that the God that we serve, the God that has sent us forward, is not going to leave us alone. Matter of fact, he made a plan for this some thousands of years ago to leave us with a comforter called the Holy Spirit. So I applaud each and every one of you and those who've been on this whole weekend. And I'm flipping it tomorrow. I think tomorrow night we're going to flip it. I'll be the only black face on the panel, and I'm going to have all white guys, some of my white friends on. I want to hear what the white, Justin, thank you very much, but I want to hear what the white folks have to say too. And so, man, don't stop. America, world, we're not going away. It ends today. We are not going away. And if we have to be political, we'll be political about this. I see where you're going with just arresting the one officer after we had protests. We see that. And we see the fact that the other three should be arrested as well, because if it was us doing the same thing, we'd be accessories to the same crime.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Accessory to the same crime. Automatically. So if you're really serious about peace, don't go tell the protesters to be peaceful and not give them an answer. You arrest those other three officers immediately. And then you don't wait because of the pandemic to have court sessions. You try those individuals. Give us an outcome. This country needs an outcome. Good or bad. Show justice.
That's right.
Without any justice, there will not be any peace. All right, family. We'll continue to have these conversations. Thank you all for coming out today. We'll have another conversation tomorrow at 7 o'clock with my white friends. And we're going to have this talk. And let's see what God is going to do. Have a blessed night, America. We love you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Barrett.
Thank you, Barrett.
Thank you.
Thank
Peace.
Barack. Okay, buddy.